Qualities needed to reconnect with family. Episode 7, Sincerity. Part of the series, Conflict Resolution Insights from Brett Lovett, The Compassion Project, and FamilyReconcile.com.
Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast by InstantMediations.com, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube, the Instant Mediations app, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact-dependent.
Hi everyone, Mac Natalia here, attorney, mediator, and arbitrator working throughout Florida and Texas.
And Natalia advocate, mediator, and arbitrator here in Warsaw, Poland.
Hi, and I'm Brett Lovett, and I am the founder of FamilyReconcile.com.
Great to have you again, Brett. So this time I'm coming to you live from Warsaw, Poland with Natalia at her office here. And we're connecting this week for a new topic on sincerity. As everyone knows, we've been going through these 10 different qualities that people in relationships, whether they be romantic relationships or the family relationships, whatever kind of relationships, we are going through all these qualities that people in relationships need to have in order to reconnect. Okay. And so just a quick reminder, a quick refresher, so to speak, we have talked about deference as number one, quality of gratitude, number two, humility, number three, number four, vulnerability, number five, apology, number six, forgiveness, and number seven, we are on it today. We're talking about the quality of sincerity. And so we're looking forward to you, Brett, taking us through this definition and why it's important in order to help us reconnect. So Brett, have at it. The first question, what is sincerity?
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show again here. I always look forward to these discussions with you guys. The sincerity is a quality I think that often gets overlooked. I mean, you have your opinion too. The definition is this: it's free of pretense, deceit, and hypocrisy. So, those are some big terms too, thrown around. Some we hear more so than others. But that's essentially what the Webster's Dictionary defines sincerity as.
Thank you for that. And if we already have these three, meaning sincerity as a lack of pretense and lack of deceit and lack of hypocrisy, can we get closer into those three defining elements? Can you also tell something more about it?
Yeah. Okay. So, if we take pretense, for example, the pretense is the attempt to make something appear as something that it's not. It is essentially pretense. Deceit is essentially misrepresentation, and hypocrisy. Well, that would be claiming to have values or beliefs of a certain kind, but then our conduct not conforming to those claimed values or beliefs.
So Brett, well, let's say that sincerity is not being applied, okay, by individuals or one individual in a relationship. What danger exists if sincerity is not something that we are working on or that we are paying attention to?
Good question. Sincerity is sincerity is such a vital quality when we're talking about the context of relationships, because if someone's dealing with someone else who's emotionally aloof, right, or different from us in that regard, the danger is that you could end up losing communication. Communication could wane. And if the communication wanes, then ultimately the connection can wane or even be lost. And if you remember, again, we haven't set these qualities just randomly picking them out. They tie into one another. Understanding all of them, I mentioned this in our last episode, helps us to understand each one individually and vice versa. But connection is huge. That's what we're here about. This is We're talking about relationships. We're talking about relationships not just in the family, but relationships anywhere. And what are they predicated on? Ultimately, it's connection. What do we seek? What does the neuroscience show, how we behave? It's we seek and look for connection. So lack of sincerity is a danger zone for losing the very thing that really we exist and look for in our own lives.
Thank you for that. And please tell us, we're talking about connection. And this is actually, again, this is what is a part of the title, Reconnecting. Why do we need connection? I know it is not about just sincerity, but all the qualities we're talking about. But what role this connection plays in our lives?
I mean, if you think about this, probably is a question that every person you ask it of would answer in a slightly different way, right? Because connection means kind of different things to different people. When I was listening to your question, I was thinking of, why do institutions like penal institutions isolate people? For punishment. You've heard of Guantanamo Bay, and the military used, this place to punish or deal with extremists. And one of the ways they do that is through isolation. There's a supermax security prison in Denver, and people are only allowed, those individuals that are there I think are only allowed out of their cells or quarantine area for like 1 hour a day. Why do they do that? It's because they're interfering with what we desire, and that is connection. And that hopefully that's not an overly harsh thing. That was what came to my mind as an example to show how powerful connection is, because it can actually be used as a disciplinary measure when you take that away. And when you take connection away, there are things that happen to us psychologically. So on that level, why is connection important? It fundamentally can change our disposition, whether we have connection or whether we don't.
So going back to sincerity, can you loop sincerity to some of the other attributes just to show how important sincerity is? Meaning, for example, you can't present a good quality of forgiveness. That quality, you can't present it well if you're not sincere about it, if you don't do it sincerely, right? So you can't do a good job in apologizing if you're not doing it sincerely, because otherwise it'll be considered fake and people can read that out of you. So can you go into that and explain why sincerity is so fundamental of a quality that for people to try to have?
Yeah, that's good. It really does weave in and out of every quality that we've talked about thus far. I don't want to, try to rehash all 7 or so qualities because we're on limited time. Maybe I'll just kind of further elaborate on the one that you mentioned a couple, but one of the ones that you mentioned was apology. And remember, people, and we talked about this in the program, I think people want to apologize and they want to do it right, but sometimes they don't know how. I've done this. I've had this happen where I've apologized for something. I felt I was sincere, but it wasn't accepted. And I wonder, well, why? Could I said it somewhat? Could I use different words? Why? And I struggled with why that was. And when I go back and I think about instances in my own experience where maybe I offered an apology and it seems to not have been accepted, I thought maybe it was my lack of empathy. It was my lack of putting myself in their shoes when I was offering the apology so that they didn't sense the sincerity. So the apology itself, I'm sorry, I really felt that. But maybe I didn't convey the empathy. And so by conveying the empathy, I also convey what? Sincerity. Therefore makes the apology acceptable or likely acceptable if everybody's dealing with, in trueness with one another. So that's a really good example of how apology can be accepted or not accepted based on sincerity alone.
And why is it then so hard to get it right if it can be beneficial? So if sincerity can serve a valid, can be a valid factor in our relationships, why is it so hard to get it right?
Again, really good question. This is how I pictured in my head. Again, people want to, somebody may be more open to vulnerability than somebody else. We talked about somebody perhaps being in a relationship where one of the partners is more aloof than the other person. And so what I've seen, and I've even seen this in myself, is you can try and compensate for somebody else's aloofness or distance by being ultra vulnerable. And we talked about vulnerability too, by being ultra vulnerable and open, because in our mind, we're saying, wow, if I'm open, if I'm completely open and I'm completely vulnerable, well, then I'm going to foster that into the other person. And that could happen. That could happen. But where we usually get in trouble with this, to answer your question as to why this is so hard, is because going through the process of being ultra open, we do this thing where this trigger goes off and all of a sudden all this emotion comes flooding in. And we may have clearly thought in our mind, well, this is what I want to say to the partner or to the other person in the relationship. But in the process of doing that, we let all this raw emotion come in, and that message gets muddied. It gets covered or watered down because people are picking up on the emotion. We may say something that isn't an accusation, but it may very well come across as an accusation, even though it isn't. And so they're not paying attention to the message. They're paying attention to the emotion that you're showing. So, vulnerability is good. Yes. Emotion can be good. But when we're talking about sincerity, if you really want to do it the right way, we need to practice this. We need to do it with less emotion involved so that we can get the message across. And that's the danger. All I'm saying is it's good to be open and it's good to be expressive and it's good to maybe think that you want to compensate for somebody else's aloofness, but you can muddy that with emotion. I'll give you a practical tip for couples or for anybody in a relationship at the end of the program today in a few minutes. I'll give a practical tip at how you might actually be able to supersede or overcome that type of event happening while you're trying to be sincere.
Thank you. So before we get to those practical tips, can you speak a little bit again about the connection between sincerity and telling the truth and truthfulness? Okay, because one of the things that I kind of heard a second ago is how you have to take the emotions out of it, right? You have to speak or share the information in such a way to where it can be accepted as being sincere. So something I've always heard in my life is where people express where the truth hurts, where they don't care how it comes across. They just say the blunt truth because they think that person, so-and-so, needs to hear it, okay? Or sometimes it's to maybe put somebody in their place, so to speak. Can you speak a little bit about quote-unquote raw truth and just getting it out there versus doing it sincerely, but in a way that people can actually take in and receive?
Yeah. So is there a connection between sincerity and truthfulness? Yes. Are they similar? Yes. Are they distinct? Yes. Truthfulness has more to do with you might want to call it's the body of real things, the body of events, the body of facts. That's truthfulness. Based on the facts, you can likely prove whether somebody is telling the truth or not. Agreed? Sincerity, though it can be sensed, can't be proven. How do you prove whether somebody's sincere or not? Now, people say all the time, that was sincere, that wasn't sincere. I mean, you hear that all the time, but can it be proved? Not like truthfulness. So they're similar, but there are distinctions, between the two. As you mentioned, being blunt with saying something. You can be completely blunt and you can be completely truthful. Is sincerity, here's my question, is sincerity always truthfulness? Not always. And I think that example that you gave in your question about being blunt and just saying the blunt truth is an example of that. Being more damage can be done by being blunt, and you can lose sincerity. You can still try to do the same thing and say it in a different way, come from a different angle, probably still accomplish the same thing through sincerity. It's kind of a shortcut, right? We take this shortcut and we say, forget about sincerity. We don't even acknowledge it. And then after the fact, we look back and go, well, they didn't even get what I was talking about. They didn't even get the sense of what I was saying. And that might be the reason why, because what we were trying to say was lost either in emotion or it lacked sincerity. And so it was lost. So that's again, that's a kind of a nuance between sincerity and truthfulness, something we should be cognizant of when it comes to being sincere. We can step back and say, am I being blunt? And is being completely open and vulnerable and truthful and allowing all this emotion to come in and taking it as a shortcut, is that really helping me get the message across? Is that really helping me connect? It goes back to connection, remember? Are we connecting through that, through bluntness, or are we connecting through sincerity? I would think the sincerity would win out over bluntness. So these are nuances that help our understanding when we're trying to connect through all these different qualities we've talked about, and we just happen to be talking about sincerity today.
So once again, talking about the sincerity and a little bit into depth of it, you said that actually we can't measure sincerity, but we can feel it. And therefore, sincerity is subjective. Can you please say a word about it? How it is that we can feel that someone is sincere, we can't measure it, and yet we do have some sort of reception of someone else's sincerity or lack of it.
Right. So again, I'll reemphasize. I don't think we have the right or the capability to say unilaterally or wholly that somebody's being sincere or not, because you can't measure it. Sincerity is internal, right? It's an internal thing. All I can say is that when I've experienced sincerity, and if you can think about instances where you've experienced somebody saying something to you sincere, that may even been a difficult thing to say, there is a sense, and that sense means different things to different people, but there is a sense of whether or not that is coming from a place of realism or truism, meaning it lacks agenda. It lacks manipulation. It lacks any of these other these negative qualities. We can sense that. It's hard for me to qualify or quantify sincerity because it can't be. I don't think so. So the question is a good one, but it's difficult to answer, and I think it means different things to different people. As you were asking the question, though, Natalia, I thought about this. Remember, when relationships start, we're generally very respectful, right? We're very respectful. It doesn't have to just be romantic relationship. It can be any relationship. We're usually very respectful, and we're actually kind of vulnerable. We're open. We're letting people know about us. We're letting them in. But there's these boundaries, right? And again, you can think about your own relationships in this regard. And then over time, what happens in relationships? Sometimes we get you call it too comfortable, and we get too comfortable, and so that respect goes away. And then we essentially, what we're doing is we're expecting too much of our partners. We're expecting too much of the relationships on the other end. So what we need to do when it comes to sincerity, we need to think and go back to that original, what we call phase. Okay, the original phase or safe zone. There's a safe zone. If relationships, especially within a family or any relationship, can operate in this safe zone of respect, then that allows for sincerity and that allows for connection. The problem is when we get too comfortable, we expect too much, we lose that respect, and we just say, well, you need to take this because, we've reached this place where you just need to take whatever I'm going to say. That's where we get into trouble. So how do we get out of that? We become more sincere. We work on our sincerity. We work on getting back to that safe zone, the thing that originally brought us together in the first place.
Thank you, Brett. So are there any other practical suggestions for application of sincerity in a relationship?
Yeah, this is what I was mentioning earlier. Obviously, there's many things that we can do. Here's one thing that I found that I thought was so neat when I had first read it. It would apply to a couple, but really can apply to any relationship. But in this context, it applied to the couple. It talked about shared journaling. Okay, shared journaling. You know, what does that mean? Well, that means, you know, if there is an issue, if there's something that you want to talk about, and you think about it, and you're saying, I can say this message to them, but the emotions might get triggered and I might not say. Well, how about writing it down? Research shows that when you write something down, you slow down, and the thoughts are more along the lines of what you want to communicate. And then the other partner can pick that journal up and can read those thoughts, and then they can add their thoughts. And then now there's this communication going on minus over emotion. It's not that you don't want any emotion. It's minus overt, complicating, triggered emotion, pent up frustrations, you know, old baggage coming up and clouding the message, right? Does it seem simple? I guess it does, but it's a powerful tool. I mean, think about that. If two use that, what kind of sincere messages could be sent in these letters within this journal between partners? Amazing. I would say if you want to work on the quality of sincerity with your partner or with somebody in a relationship, try a shared journal. And writing down, doesn't have to be lengthy, could be just short little quips about things, but see how that communication goes back and forth through that type of mechanism. I think you'd be quite surprised at the benefits and the sincerity that would come from that type of exercise.
Hi, and with all that statements from you and the encouragement of us practicing sincerity, we would like to close this podcast of today, wishing you good luck with practicing all the qualities we've already touched on, meaning deference, gratitude, humility, vulnerability, apology, forgiveness, and today's sincerity. And we are looking forward to our conversation with you, Brett, on kindness. See you next time.
Bye-bye for now.